I checked my watch as I stepped out of the ranger station. 11:37. My first night shift at Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something I wasn't ready for. I adjusted my flashlight and clipped the radio to my belt. The weight felt reassuring, solid. Nolan had spent 3 weeks training me, walking me through every trail, every protocol, every safety procedure. But he'd also mentioned unusual incidents without ever giving details. Just said I'd understand when the time came. The Cataract Falls Trail stretched ahead of me, disappearing into darkness beyond my flashlight beam. October nights in the Smokies got cold fast, and the air already had that sharp bite that meant winter wasn't far off. I pulled my jacket tighter and started walking. My boots crunched on fallen leaves. The sound echoed off the trees, making the forest feel bigger and emptier than it had during daylight training runs. Every ranger did night patrols, part of the job. But this felt different somehow. I'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when I heard something off to my left, not an animal sound, more like footsteps, but slow and deliberate. I stopped and listened. Nothing. I kept going. The trail curved around a cluster of boulders, and my flashlight swept across the tree line. That's when I saw it. A figure in a bright yellow raincoat, walking slowly through the trees about 50 yards off the designated path. The person moved with deliberate steps, weaving between the trunks like they knew exactly where they were going. I called out, "Hey, you need to stay on the trail." My voice carried through the still air, but the figure didn't respond, didn't even turn around. I aimed my flashlight beam directly at them, but they kept walking at that same slow, steady pace. This wasn't right. People got lost in these woods all the time, but they didn't usually ignore park rangers calling to them. And nobody wore a raincoat on a clear night like this. I pushed through the undergrowth, branches catching at my uniform. The figure had been moving away from me, but I was younger and faster. Should have caught up in no time. The trees grew thicker as I got farther from the trail. My flashlight beam bounced off trunks and low-hanging branches, creating shadows that shifted and moved. I kept my eyes fixed on that yellow raincoat, maybe 30 yards ahead now. "Sir, ma'am, I need you to stop." Still no response. The figure kept walking, disappearing behind a cluster of trees and reappearing on the other side. I picked up my pace, pushing through a stand of young pines. When I broke through to the other side, the figure was gone. I stopped and swept my flashlight in a wide arc. Nothing. Just trees and shadows and the sound of my own breathing. I walked forward to where I'd last seen the yellow raincoat, checking the ground for footprints. The forest floor was covered in a thick layer of dead leaves, the kind that should show disturbance if someone had walked through, but I didn't see any signs that anyone had been here. No broken branches, no disturbed undergrowth, no footprints. I spent 10 more minutes searching the area, working in expanding circles. Found nothing. My radio crackled to life. "Unit 7, this is base. Status report." I keyed the mic. "Unit 7 here. I'm about a quarter-mile east of the Cataract Falls Trail, investigating a possible hiker off the designated path." "Copy that. Need assistance?" I looked around one more time. The woods felt normal now, just trees and darkness and the distant sound of water running over rocks. "Negative. False alarm, I think. Returning to patrol route." "Roger that, Unit 7. I made my way back to the trail, using my flashlight to retrace my steps. The whole thing had taken maybe 15 minutes, but it felt longer, like I'd been walking in circles. Back on the main trail, I continued my rounds. The incident bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on why. People got disoriented in the woods. Maybe whoever it was had found their way back to a parking area on their own. The trail wound upward through a section of old-growth forest. My flashlight picked out the massive trunks of trees that had been standing here for centuries. During training, Nolan had told me some of these giants were older than the park itself, older than the towns around it. I checked my watch. 11:58. The sound of water grew louder as I approached the falls. Not much of a waterfall this time of year, just a thin stream cascading down the rock face. But the pool at the bottom reflected my flashlight beam like black glass. That's when I saw her. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, sitting on a fallen log beside the trail. She wore a thin white dress that looked too light for the mountain air, and she was shivering, crying softly. I stopped about 10 feet away. "Hey there, you okay?" She looked up at me with pale blue eyes. Blonde hair hung down past her shoulders, and her cheeks looked gaunt, like she hadn't eaten in a while. "I'm lost," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I can't find my parents." I kept my distance, but knelt down to her eye level. First rule Nolan had taught me about dealing with lost kids was to stay calm and non-threatening. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Rita," she said. "Rita Ortega." "Okay, Rita. I'm Grayson. I'm a park ranger, and I'm going to help you find your parents. Can you tell me where you last saw them?" She shook her head. "We were camping. I woke up and they were gone." That didn't make sense. What parents would leave a 10-year-old alone in the woods? But kids got confused when they were scared. Maybe she'd wandered off on her own and gotten turned around. "Do you remember what campsite you were staying at?" "I don't know." She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "Everything looks the same in the dark." I reached for my radio. "I'm going to call this in, okay? We'll get some more people out here to help look for your mom and dad." Rita nodded and pulled her arms tighter around herself. The dress really was too thin for this weather. I wondered if I should offer her my jacket, but protocol said to keep some distance until I knew more about the situation. "Rita, how long have you been sitting here?" "I don't know. A long time, I think." I keyed the radio. "Base, this is Ranger Simmons. I've got a lost child here at Cataract Falls. 10-year-old girl. Says her name's Rita Ortega." The radio crackled. "Copy that, Simmons. Are you able to get more details on her location?" "Working on it." I clipped the radio back to my belt and looked at Rita. She'd stopped crying but was still shivering. Her skin looked pale, almost blue in the flashlight beam. Too cold. "Rita, I'm going to give you my jacket, okay? Then we'll figure out where your parents might be." She nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Thank you." I set my flashlight on the log beside her and started working the zipper on my ranger jacket. The metal was cold under my fingers. Rita watched me with those pale blue eyes, not saying anything. "How old are you, Rita?" 10. "And you're camping with just your mom and dad?" "Yes." Her voice was barely a whisper. I got the jacket off and shook it out. The fabric was warm from my body heat. Rita would probably swim in it, but it'd keep her from freezing while we sorted this out. "Were you staying at one of the designated camping areas? Elkmont? Cosby?" Rita shook her head. "I don't know the name. We just drove until Daddy found a good spot." That complicated things. People weren't supposed to camp outside the designated areas, but it happened. Especially folks who didn't know the rules or figured they could get away with it for one night. "Okay, we'll figure it out." I stepped closer and held out the jacket. "Here you go." Rita reached up to take it. Her fingers were almost white, like she'd been sitting in the cold for hours. I extended the jacket toward her. The moment the fabric touched her hand, she was gone. Not like she ran away. Not like she ducked behind something. Gone. Completely gone. Like she'd never been there at all. My jacket fell to the ground where she'd been sitting. The log was empty. No indent in the bark where her weight had been. No warmth lingering in the air. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a root. My flashlight beam swept wildly across the empty log, the fallen jacket, the space where Rita had been sitting 2 seconds ago. "Rita!" My voice came out hoarse. "Rita!" I grabbed the flashlight and spun in a circle, cutting through the darkness with the beam. Trees, rocks, the sound of water falling. Nothing else. "Rita, where are you?" I ran to the other side of the log, checking behind it. Nothing. I swept the flashlight across the ground, looking for footprints, disturbed leaves, anything that showed where she might have gone. The leaves were undisturbed, like no one had been sitting there at all. My hands were shaking as I picked up my jacket. The fabric was cold now, no trace of the warmth it should have held from being on my body. I put it back on with fumbling fingers. This wasn't possible. People didn't just vanish. Kids didn't disappear into thin air. There had to be an explanation. I called her name again, louder this time. My voice echoed off the rocks around the falls and faded into nothing. No answer. I spent the next 10 minutes searching in expanding circles around the log. I checked behind every tree, every boulder, every shadow my flashlight could reach. I found nothing. No sign anyone had been there. But I'd talked to her. I'd seen her shivering. She'd told me her name, told me she was lost. You don't imagine a whole conversation. My radio crackled. "Simmons, what's your status on that lost child?" I stared at the empty log for a long moment before reaching for the radio. What was I supposed to say? That the kid had vanished into thin air the moment I tried to help her. "Base, this is Simmons. I need to return to the station. We've got a situation here." "Copy that." "What kind of situation?" My finger hesitated over the radio button. "The child, she's gone. I can't locate her." "Did she wander off while you were calling it in?" "No, she just disappeared." Silence on the radio for a few seconds. Then, "Simmons, return to base immediately. Do not continue patrol." "Copy." I took one last look around the area. The water kept falling. The trees stood where they always had. Everything was normal except for the fact that a 10-year-old girl had vanished the moment I'd tried to help her. I started back toward the station, my flashlight beam jumping ahead of me on the trail. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every shadow looked like it might be hiding something. Every sound made me turn around. By the time I reached the ranger station, my shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cold mountain air. The building's lights looked warmer and more welcoming than they had when I'd left 2 hours ago. Nolan was waiting by the front door. He took one look at my face and nodded toward the break room. "Coffee?" "Yeah." He didn't ask any questions while he poured 2 cups from the pot that always seemed to be brewing. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it was warm and real and normal. I wrapped my hands around the mug and let the heat sink into my fingers. Nolan sat down across from me at the small table. His weathered face was serious but not surprised, like he'd been expecting this call. "Tell me what happened." I started with the figure in the yellow raincoat. Nolan listened without interrupting, his blue eyes steady on my face. He didn't look skeptical or concerned about my mental state. He just listened. When I got to the part about Rita disappearing, Nolan leaned back in his chair. He was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee mug in slow circles on the table. "Rita Ortega," he said finally. "You know her?" "I know of her." Nolan took a sip of his coffee. "Blonde hair, pale blue eyes, thin white dress?" My stomach dropped. "How did you know that?" "Because you're not the first ranger to meet her." I set my coffee mug down harder than I meant to. "What do you mean?" Nolan got up and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of the break room. He pulled out a worn notebook with a cracked leather cover and came back to the table. "There are things about this job that don't make it into the training manuals," he said, setting the notebook between us. "Things you can't really prepare someone for. Things the previous rangers learned through experience." He opened the notebook. The pages were filled with handwritten notes in different pens, different handwriting, like multiple people had contributed to it over the years. This park has been here a long time. Longer than the rangers, longer than the designation as a national park. Some things were here before we showed up, and They're still here now. I stared at the notebook. The page he'd opened to had a list of rules written in neat block letters. Night shift protocols. 1. Do not follow voices calling for help after midnight. 2. If you encounter Rita Ortega, do not touch her or give her anything. 3. Yellow raincoat figure, observe only, do not pursue. 4. Report all encounters immediately. What is this? Nolan turned the page, more rules written in different handwriting. Some were dated, going back 15 years. Every ranger who's worked nights here has added to this. Things they've learned. Things they wish someone had told them before their first encounter. My hands were shaking again. You're telling me that girl I met tonight, she's not real? I'm telling you she's something that shouldn't be approached or helped, no matter how much she seems to need it. Nolan's voice was calm, matter of fact. She appears to new rangers, usually within their first few weeks, always the same story, always asking for help finding her parents. But I talked to her. She was real. She was cold. She seems real. That's what makes her dangerous. Nolan turned another page. This one had a detailed account written in cramped handwriting, dated 3 years ago. Ranger Martinez tried to help her, gave her his jacket just like you were about to do. She didn't disappear that time. I leaned forward to read the account. The handwriting was shaky, like it had been written by someone whose hands wouldn't stay steady. What happened to Martinez? He led her back toward the station. She talked the whole way. Told him about getting separated from her parents, about being scared and cold. Normal things a lost kid would say. Nolan's finger traced a line in the notebook, but the closer they got to the station, the more wrong things became. Her voice started echoing like it was coming from multiple directions. Her skin got colder. By the time they reached the parking lot, Martinez realized she wasn't casting a shadow in his flashlight beam. Where is Martinez now? Transferred out 2 days later. Requested a posting as far from here as possible. I sat back in my chair. The coffee had gone cold in my mug, but I didn't want to drink it anyway. My stomach felt like it was full of lead. How many rangers have encountered her? Most of them. She's been showing up for at least 15 years, probably longer. Always the same age, always the same dress, always the same story. Nolan turned to the front of the notebook. The first page had a simple heading: Rules for Night Shifts, Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Below that, in faded ink: read this, follow this, add to this, pass it on. The Park Service doesn't know about this? What would we tell them? That we've got a ghost child asking rangers for help? Nolan shook his head. They'd shut down night patrols or transfer everyone out, but she's not going anywhere. She'll just find new rangers to approach. So we just ignore her? We follow the rules. We don't engage. We don't try to help. And we make sure every new ranger knows what they're dealing with before they encounter something they can't explain. I looked at the notebook again. Page after page of rules, observations, encounters, all written by people who'd experienced things that shouldn't exist. The figure in the yellow raincoat, that's in here too. Rule 3. Observe only, don't pursue. You did the right thing tonight. I didn't know there were rules. You do now. Nolan closed the notebook and slid it across the table to me. Take this home, read it, all of it, then bring it back tomorrow night. I picked up the notebook. It was heavier than it looked, worn smooth by years of handling. How long have you been dealing with this? 20 years, since my first week on the job. Nolan finished his coffee and stood up. My trainer gave me that notebook the same way I'm giving it to you, told me the same things I'm telling you. And you just accepted it. After the third time I encountered Rita, yeah, I accepted it. He walked to the sink and rinsed out his mug. This job isn't just about helping lost hikers and maintaining trails. Sometimes it's about knowing when not to help. when something that looks like it needs assistance is actually something else entirely. Nolan turned back to me. You did good tonight. Your instincts were right. You followed protocol with what appeared to be a lost child. But when something impossible happened, you didn't try to rationalize it away. You came back and reported it. What if I'd actually given her the jacket? Then you'd probably be writing your own account in that notebook right now, if you were lucky enough to make it back to write anything at all. I opened the notebook to a random page. An entry dated 5 years ago described an encounter with a woman in hiking gear who claimed her husband had fallen into a ravine. The account ended with, "Her eyes reflected light like an animal's. When I radioed for backup, she smiled and walked directly through a tree trunk." How many of these things are out there? Read the notebook. You'll get an idea. Nolan grabbed his keys from the counter. I'm heading home. You should too. Tomorrow night we'll go over the rules in detail before your shift. Am I supposed to just pretend this is normal? You're supposed to accept that this is part of the job, part of this place. Nolan paused at the door. The mountains have their own rules. We're just visitors here, even with our uniforms and radios and authority. Some things were here long before us, and they'll be here long after we're gone. He left me alone in the break room with a notebook and a dozen questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. I flipped through more pages, accounts of strange sounds that led rangers off trails, descriptions of hikers who cast no shadows, rules about never looking directly at certain rock formations after 2 a.m. At the back of the notebook, someone had written in red ink, "Remember, your job is to protect the visitors. Sometimes that means protecting them from things they'll never know existed. Sometimes it means protecting them from yourself when you encounter something you can't help." I closed the notebook and sat back in my chair. 3 hours ago, my biggest concern had been remembering all the trail names and radio protocols. Now I was holding a handbook for dealing with supernatural encounters that the Park Service apparently didn't know about. Or maybe they did know, and this was just how they handled it. Let the rangers figure it out on their own, pass the knowledge down through unofficial channels, keep the official records clean. I thought about Rita's pale blue eyes, the way she'd shivered in that thin dress. She'd seemed so real, so genuinely in need of help. If I hadn't seen her disappear with my own eyes, I'd still be out there searching for her. The notebook felt solid in my hands, real. Proof that I wasn't losing my mind, that other people had experienced the same impossible things. I tucked it under my arm and headed for the door. Tomorrow night I'd be back out on those trails, but now I'd know what I might encounter in the darkness between the trees. I opened the notebook when I got home. The leather cover was soft from years of handling, and the pages had that yellow tint old paper gets. Nolan's handwriting filled the first page in black ink, neat block letters like he'd taken his time with it. Night shift protocols, essential rules for ranger safety. Below that, 4 numbered items. I read them twice before the words really sank in. Rule 1. Never follow anyone wearing a yellow raincoat who is off the designated trails. They will disappear. Sometimes the person following them disappears too. Rule 2. If you hear voices calling your name after midnight, do not respond. Do not investigate. Continue your patrol route. Rule 3. If you encounter Rita Ortega, observe only. Do not touch her. Do not give her anything. Do not attempt to lead her anywhere. Rule 4. Screams from deep in the forest, more than 100 yards, should be ignored. Screams from nearby trails require immediate investigation. I set the notebook down on my kitchen table and stared at it. This was what Nolan called essential safety protocols, rules about disappearing people and voices in the dark. Rules about a specific little girl who apparently showed up regularly to mess with new rangers. The whole thing sounded like something you'd tell around a campfire to scare kids. I picked up the notebook again and flipped through more pages. Different handwriting filled the margins and spaces between Nolan's rules. Notes from other rangers, dates going back 15 years. Some entries were just a few words. Others took up half a page. Martinez, 2019. Gave her my jacket. Found it 3 days later by the old bridge. Soaked through. Quit the next week. Thompson, 2017. Followed the yellow coat for 20 minutes. Lost radio contact. Found wandering near parking lot at dawn. No memory of the night. Rodriguez, 2020. Heard my name called 17 times between midnight and 2 a.m. Stayed on trail. Nothing happened. The entries went on and on. Different rangers, different years, but the same impossible stories. People vanishing into thin air. Voices that shouldn't exist. A little girl who'd been 10 years old for over a decade. I closed the notebook and got a beer from the fridge. Sat back down at the table and opened it to the first page again. This was nuts, completely nuts. Park rangers were supposed to be practical people. We dealt with real problems, lost hikers, injured campers, wildlife encounters, not ghost stories and supernatural nonsense, but I'd seen Rita disappear. I'd watched her vanish right in front of me, not run away or hide behind something, just gone like she'd never been there at all. I took a long drink and read the rules again. The next evening, I drove back to the ranger station with the notebook in my jacket pocket. Nolan was waiting at his desk, same coffee mug in his hands. "You read it," he said when I walked in. I read it. I pulled out the notebook and set it on his desk. "This is campfire story stuff, Nolan. Supernatural nonsense." That's what I thought 20 years ago. He picked up the notebook and opened it to a page near the back. "See this entry here? That's mine, from my second week on night shift." I leaned over to read his handwriting, younger and less steady than the rules on the first page. July 15th, 2003. Ranger Mitchell is full of shit. Followed Yellow Raincoat for 30 minutes tonight. Lost sight of it near Devil's Courthouse. Radio went dead. Flashlight died. Took me 4 hours to find my way back to the trail. Don't know how I got so turned around. "Mitchell was the guy who trained me," Nolan said. "Tried to tell me the same rules I'm telling you. I thought he was messing with the new guy." "What changed your mind?" "Experience." He flipped to another page. This one's from a month later. August 22nd, 2003. Heard Sarah calling my name from the woods. Sarah's my ex-wife. Lives in Tennessee. Hadn't talked to her in 2 years. Voice sounded exactly like her. Called out for help. Said she was hurt. Took everything I had not to go looking. Nolan closed the notebook. I called Sarah the next morning. She was fine. Had been at home all night, 300 miles away. Could have been someone else. Sound carries weird in the mountains. Could have been. He leaned back in his chair. That's what I told myself for the first year. Coincidences, tricks of light and sound, stress from working nights. But it kept happening. Every few weeks, something new, something that didn't fit with the normal explanations. He tapped the notebook. Other rangers started telling me their stories. Turns out Mitchell wasn't the first one to keep notes. I sat down in the chair across from his desk. Let's say I believe this. Let's say there really are things out there that don't make sense. Why doesn't anyone talk about it? Why isn't there an official protocol? "Who would you tell?" Nolan asked. "Your supervisor? Park headquarters? What would you put in the report? Encountered supernatural entity that vanished when touched." He had a point. They'd think I was having a breakdown, or lying, or looking for attention. Best case scenario, they'd transfer you to day shift and find someone else for nights. Nolan opened the notebook again. This way works better, ranger to ranger. The people who need to know. What about Rule 1, the yellow raincoat thing? You said people disappear? Not often, but it's happened. He flipped through pages until he found what he was looking for. Thompson's the most recent. Good ranger, been here 5 years before that night. Experienced hiker, knew these trails better than most. What happened to him? Found him at dawn in the parking lot, sitting in his truck. No memory of the night after he started following the figure. Radio was dead. Flashlight was dead. He'd lost 8 hours. Maybe he fell, hit his head. No injuries, no explanation for the missing time. Nolan closed the notebook. He transferred out a week later, couldn't handle not knowing what happened to him. I thought about the figure I'd seen my first night, the way it had moved through the trees without seeming to notice the terrain, how it had vanished completely, leaving no trace. Rule 3, I said, about Rita. What happens if someone gives her something? Nolan's expression got serious. You don't want to know. Yeah, I do. He was quiet for a long moment. Martinez gave her his jacket, felt sorry for her, shivering in that thin dress. She took it and smiled and said, "Thank you." And she vanished, same as always. But 3 days later, Martinez found the jacket hanging from a tree branch near the old stone bridge, soaked through with blood, fresh blood. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Human blood? Never got it tested. Martinez burned it that same night. Nolan leaned forward. Thing is, Rita would have vanished whether he gave her the jacket or not. That's what she does. But when you give her something, when you try to help her, she gives something back. Blood. That's the easy one. Rodriguez gave her a granola bar 2 years ago. Found it a week later in his truck, crawling with maggots. In January. In a sealed vehicle. I didn't want to ask, but I had to. What's the worst thing someone gave her? Ranger Chin, about 10 years ago, gave her his flashlight. She said she was scared of the dark. Nolan's voice got quiet. Found the flashlight 3 days later in his locker at the station. Still worked fine. But every time he turned it on, instead of light, it cast shadows, dark spots that moved and shifted. That's impossible. Chen thought so too, until he started seeing things in those shadows. Shapes that looked like people but weren't quite right. Nolan shook his head. He lasted 2 more weeks before he quit. Last I heard, he was working construction in Florida. I stared at the notebook. Why doesn't she just leave people alone? Don't know. Maybe she can't help it. Maybe it's just what she is. Nolan picked up his coffee mug. Point is, the rules work. Follow them, and you'll be fine. Break them, and you'll end up like the others. How many others? In 20 years? Maybe a dozen rangers have transferred out because of night shift encounters. 3 or 4 disappeared for hours and came back with no memory. 1 never came back at all. That stopped me cold. Someone died? Someone vanished. Ranger named Foster, about 8 years ago. Found his truck in the parking lot the next morning. Radio and flashlight were on his desk. No sign of him anywhere. What do you think happened? I think he broke the rules. Nolan finished his coffee. Foster was the type who thought he could handle anything. Tough guy, military background. Probably figured the rules didn't apply to him. I looked at the notebook again. 4 simple rules written in neat block letters. They seemed reasonable enough, even if the reasons behind them sounded crazy. I need you to memorize them, Nolan said. Word for word. Your life might depend on it. You really believe that? I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm still here. He stood up and walked to the window. The rangers who followed the rules are still here too. The ones who didn't aren't. I opened the notebook and read the rules again. 4 simple statements that made no logical sense, but apparently kept people alive. All right, I said. I'll memorize them. Good. Nolan turned back from the window. You can take the notebook with you tonight. Keep it in your pocket. But don't rely on it. If something happens out there, you won't have time to flip through pages looking for answers. I stood up and slipped the notebook into my jacket. Anything else I should know? Yeah. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't try to be a hero. Just follow the rules and finish your patrol. An hour later, I was back on the trails with the notebook in my pocket and the rules fresh in my mind. Rule 1. Don't follow the yellow raincoat. Rule 2. Don't respond to voices after midnight. Rule 3. Don't touch Rita or give her anything. Rule 4. Ignore distant screams, investigate nearby ones. Simple enough. Even if I still thought the whole thing was elaborate folklore passed down through generations of bored night shift rangers. The forest felt different tonight. Maybe it was knowing what to look for, or maybe my imagination was working overtime. Every shadow seemed deeper, every sound carried further. I found myself checking my watch more often, noting when midnight came and went. I was walking the Chimney Tops trail around 11 when I heard it. A scream. It came from deep in the forest, maybe 200 yards off the trail. A woman's voice, high and desperate. The sound echoed off the trees and rocks, making it hard to pinpoint exactly where it came from. The scream came again, longer this time, filled with terror and pain. Every instinct I had told me to run toward it. Someone was in trouble. Someone needed help. But Rule 4 was clear. Distant screams should be ignored. I stopped walking and checked my watch. 11:07. I stood there in the dark, listening. The scream came a third time. Weaker now, but still audible. Still desperate. I pulled the notebook from my pocket and flipped to the first page, using my flashlight to read Rule 4 again. Screams from deep in the forest, more than 100 yards, should be ignored. The sound was definitely more than 100 yards away, deep in the forest, off any trail. Rule 4 said to ignore it. But someone was screaming. I stood there for 5 minutes, listening. The screams came every 30 seconds or so, always from the same general direction, always the same desperate, terrified tone. After exactly 5 minutes, they stopped. I waited another minute in complete silence, then continued my patrol. I'd gotten used to the quiet by the third night. The way sounds carried different in the mountains, how my footsteps seemed louder on the trail than they should. The radio crackled every hour or so with check-ins from base, but mostly it was just me in the forest. I'd memorized Nolan's rules. All 4 of them, word for word. They sat in my head like a song you can't shake, running through them every time something felt off. Which was more often than I wanted to admit. The yellow raincoat hadn't shown up again. No screams from deep in the woods either. Just regular night sounds. Owls rustling leaves, the occasional crack of a branch settling. Normal stuff that didn't require consulting a notebook full of supernatural warnings. I was starting to think maybe I'd gotten the weird introduction out of the way. Rita vanishing like that. It had to be some kind of fluke. Maybe she'd just been really good at hiding, and I'd missed her running off when I bent down to get my jacket. People see what they expect to see, right? And I'd been primed for strange things after hearing Nolan's stories. That's what I was telling myself anyway. The Cataract Falls Trail had become routine. I knew which rocks to step around, where the path curved through the thick stands of pine. My flashlight beam swept the same pattern every night. Left, center, right, checking for anything that didn't belong. Tonight felt different though. Not bad different, just sharper somehow. Like the air was thinner or my hearing was better. I couldn't put my finger on it. I checked my watch. 11:43, right on schedule. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness ahead, lighting up maybe 20 feet of trail before the forest swallowed it. Standard visibility for this section. I'd learned to trust what I could see and not worry too much about what I couldn't. That's when I saw him. A man walking toward me on the trail. Just walking normal as you please, like it was the middle of the day instead of pushing midnight on a mountain path. No flashlight, no headlamp, nothing. Just walking. I stopped, raised my flashlight a little higher to get a better look. He was maybe 40 feet away, coming straight down the center of the trail. Average height, wearing dark clothes, jeans and what looked like a button-down shirt. His stride was steady even, each step the same length as the last, same pace, like he was counting time in his head. But it was his face that made my skin crawl. He was looking straight ahead, not at me, not at the trail, just ahead, like he was staring at something 1,000 yards away. His eyes didn't blink, didn't move left or right, just fixed on some point beyond me. I opened my mouth to call out, then stopped. Rule 2 hit me like a slap. Never respond to voices calling your name after midnight. This wasn't exactly that, but something about this guy felt wrong. The way he walked without looking where he was going. No light source. That mechanical stride. I stepped off the trail. The man kept coming. 30 feet now, 20. His pace never changed. Step, step, step. Like a metronome. His arms swung at his sides in perfect rhythm. I pressed myself against a pine tree and kept my flashlight pointed down at the ground. Not at him. Something told me not to shine it directly at his face. 15 feet. 10. He passed right by me. Close enough that I could have reached out and touched his shoulder. Close enough to hear his breathing, except he wasn't breathing. No sound at all except his footsteps on the packed dirt. I held my breath and watched him continue down the trail behind me. Same steady pace, same mechanical stride. His head never turned, never acknowledged that I existed. I counted his footsteps. 20, 30, 40. Then nothing. I waited another minute before I turned around and looked. My flashlight beam swept the trail where he'd been walking. Empty, just the path stretching back toward the parking area. I should have been able to see him for at least 100 yards in that direction. The trail was straight, no curves or hills to hide behind. But there was nothing. My hands were shaking when I pulled out the notebook. I flipped to the second page and read Rule 2 again by flashlight. Never respond to voices calling your name after midnight. Not exactly what I'd encountered, but close enough. The rules didn't cover every situation. They couldn't. But the principle was clear. Some things weren't worth investigating. I put the notebook away and continued my patrol. The rest of the night passed without incident. Normal sounds, normal shadows. By the time I got back to the station at 6 a.m., I'd almost convinced myself the man had been real. Just a hiker who'd gotten turned around in the dark. People did stupid things in the mountains all the time, but hikers carried lights, and they looked where they were going. A week passed. 7 more nights of routine patrols. No yellow raincoats, no mysterious walkers, no screams from the forest. Just me and the trails and the regular sounds of a mountain ecosystem settling in for winter. I was getting comfortable. Maybe too comfortable. Tonight I was working the Alum Cave Trail. Different route, same basic routine. The path here wound through older forest, bigger trees with thick canopies that blocked out most of the starlight. My flashlight was the only source of illumination for miles. I'd been walking for about an hour when I saw the log. It was off to the right side of the trail, a fallen oak that had been there long enough for moss to grow thick on the bark. Big enough to sit on comfortably, the kind of spot day hikers used for rest breaks. Someone was sitting on it. My flashlight beam caught a flash of white fabric, and my stomach dropped. Rita. She sat in the exact same position as before, knees pulled up to her chest, arms wrapped around her legs, the same thin white dress, the same blonde hair falling past her shoulders. Even from 15 feet away, I could see her shivering. I stopped walking. The notebook felt heavy in my pocket. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was small, scared, the same voice from a week ago. "Can you help me?" Rule 3. Only observe Rita Ortega. Don't touch her. Don't give her anything. Don't lead her anywhere. "I'm still lost," she continued. I've been looking for my parents. They're by the big waterfall now, I think. But I can't find them in the dark. I kept my distance. 15 feet felt safe. Far enough that I couldn't accidentally touch her. Close enough that I could keep her in my flashlight beam. "Please," she said. "I'm so cold. Do you have a jacket I could borrow? Just until I find my mom and dad?" My heart was pounding. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to help her. She looked so small, so scared. A 10-year-old kid lost in the mountains at midnight. What kind of person would just stand there and watch her suffer? But I'd read the notebook. I knew what happened to rangers who tried to help Rita Ortega. "I can't do that," I said. The words came out steadier than I felt. Rita looked up at me with those pale blue eyes, and for a second she just stared, like she was processing what I'd said. Then her expression changed. It happened fast. One moment she was a frightened child, the next something else entirely. Her face went blank, empty. The fear and vulnerability just switched off, like someone had flipped a light. "Why won't you help me?" she asked. Her voice was different now. Still small, still childlike, but with something underneath it. An echo that seemed to come from the trees around us instead of her mouth. Like multiple people were speaking the same words at slightly different times. I took a step back. "I've been waiting for you," she said. "I've been sitting here for so long, and you won't even give me your jacket." The echo was getting stronger. Her voice bounced off the trees, came at me from 3 different directions at once, but her lips were barely moving. Rita stood up. She moved wrong. Too smooth, like she was floating instead of using her legs. Her feet touched the ground, but there was no weight behind it. No sound of shoes on leaves. "All the other rangers helped me," she said. "They were nice. They cared about lost little girls." She took a step toward me, then another. With each step she became less solid. Not disappearing exactly, but fading. Like someone was slowly turning down her brightness. I could see the trees behind her through her white dress. "Why are you different?" she asked. "Why won't you help me?" I backed away, keeping the distance between us. My flashlight beam passed right through her now. She was translucent, ghostly, but still moving toward me with that unnaturally smooth glide. "I know what you are," I said. Rita smiled. It wasn't a child's smile anymore, too wide, too knowing. Her teeth looked sharp in the dim light. "Do you?" she asked. "Do you really?" Her voice echoed from everywhere now, the trees, the ground, the air itself. She was 10 feet away, then 5, still fading with each step, but somehow more terrifying as she became less real. I turned and ran, not walked fast, not backed away carefully. I ran like my life depended on it, crashing through the underbrush toward where I'd parked my truck. Branches caught at my uniform, roots tried to trip me, but I didn't slow down. Behind me, I heard laughter, light and musical, like a child delighted by a game. But it came from every direction at once, following me through the forest. I reached my truck and fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so bad I could barely get them in the ignition. The engine turned over on the second try, and I was on the radio before I'd even put it in drive. "Base, this is Simmons. I need to speak with Nolan. Now." "Base, this is Simmons. I need to speak with Nolan. Now." Static crackled through the radio for a few seconds before the dispatcher's voice came through. "Copy that, Simmons. Hold your position. Nolan's on his way." I sat in the truck with the engine running, hands still shaking on the steering wheel. The headlights cut through the darkness ahead, showing nothing but empty road and trees, but I kept checking the mirrors anyway. 15 minutes later, Nolan's truck pulled up behind mine. I watched him get out and walk over, his flashlight beam sweeping the area around my vehicle before he reached the driver's side window. "You okay?" he asked. I rolled down the window. She knew about the rules. Nolan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. What did she say? Asked why I wouldn't help her like the other rangers did. When I told her I knew what she was, she said something about whether I really understood. I rubbed my face with both hands. She knew someone had taught me the rules. They always know. Nolan leaned against the side of my truck. Doesn't matter. Knowing the rules is what kept you alive tonight. How's that supposed to make sense? If she knows about the rules, why do they work? Because the rules aren't about tricking them or hiding from them. They're about boundaries. Nolan looked out at the dark forest. These things, whatever they are, they operate by certain limits. The rules help us stay within those limits. I started to ask another question, but Nolan held up his hand. Save it for later. Right now, I need you to finish your patrol. Can you do that? I thought about it. The idea of getting out of the truck again made my stomach clench, but I'd signed up for this job. And Nolan was right. The rules had worked. Yeah, I can do that. Good. Take the main road back to the station when you're done. Don't use any of the side trails tonight. He walked back to his truck and waited until I pulled away before following me partway back toward the trail system. In my rearview mirror, I watched his headlights disappear as he turned toward the ranger station. The rest of the night passed without incident. I stuck to the main trails, kept my radio close, and checked my watch every few minutes. By the time I made it back to base at 6 in the morning, I was exhausted but intact. Nolan was waiting with coffee and a nod of approval. "You did good tonight," he said. "Following the rules when everything in you wants to help, that's the hardest part of this job." I poured myself a cup and sat down across from him. Does it get easier? No, but you get better at it. 2 weeks later, I was patrolling near Cades Cove when I heard the scream again. This time, it was different. Not the distant cry from deep in the forest that I'd learned to ignore, but something much closer. The sound came from just beyond the tree line to my left, maybe 30 yards from where I stood on the trail. A woman's voice, high and desperate, calling for help. I stopped walking and pulled out the notebook, even though I'd memorized every word by now. Rule 4 was clear about this situation. Screams from deep forest, over 100 yards away, should be ignored completely. But nearby screams, especially those close to designated trails, meant immediate danger to park visitors. The scream came again, closer this time. Definitely within the 30-yard range that qualified as nearby, according to the notebook's guidelines. I had to investigate, but first I needed to get to safety. The nearest building was an old cabin about 200 yards ahead, used for equipment storage during the busy season. If there was real danger out there, I'd need shelter and a secure position to radio for backup. The scream echoed through the trees a third time, and now I could hear something else underneath it. A quality that made the hair on my arms stand up. It sounded wrong somehow, like a recording played at the wrong speed. I started moving toward the cabin, keeping my flashlight trained on the tree line where the screams were coming from. My radio crackled with static, but no voices came through. The path to the cabin curved around a small clearing, and as I walked, the screaming continued. But now it seemed to be moving, following me along the tree line. Sometimes it came from my left, sometimes from behind me, sometimes from up ahead. That's when I realized this wasn't a lost hiker. I broke into a run. The cabin sat in a small clearing, a simple wooden structure with a metal roof and heavy shutters over the windows. I'd been here during training. Nolan had shown me where the Park Service stored emergency supplies and backup equipment during the off-season. I reached the door just as the screaming intensified. Now it was coming from multiple directions at once, surrounding the clearing. Not one voice anymore, but several, all crying out in that same desperate, wrong-sounding tone. My hands shook as I fumbled with the key. The cabin was kept locked, but all rangers carried keys to the emergency shelters. The screaming grew louder, and I could hear something else now. Movement in the underbrush around the clearing. The key turned and I pushed inside. slamming the door behind me and throwing the deadbolt. The cabin was small and dark, filled with stacked equipment and supplies. I didn't turn on my flashlight. Whatever was outside, I didn't want it to see any light coming from the windows. The screaming continued, circling the building now. Sometimes it sounded like one woman in terrible pain. Other times it was a chorus of voices, all joined together in that horrible cry for help. I pressed my back against the door and listened. Footsteps moved around the cabin, slow, deliberate steps that seemed to pause at each window. The shutters were closed, but I could hear something testing them, pressing against the wood. My radio crackled with static. I turned the volume down to almost nothing, not wanting to make any noise that might draw attention to exactly where I was inside the building. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. For a long moment, everything was quiet. Then something scraped against the wood like fingernails being dragged across the surface. The sound moved up and down the door, then stopped. The screaming started again, but now it was right outside the cabin. So close it seemed to be coming from just on the other side of the walls. Multiple voices, all crying for help, all begging someone to come and save them. I sat on the floor with my back against the door and waited. The sounds continued for nearly an hour. Screaming, footsteps, scratching at the walls and shutters. Sometimes the voices would call out specific words. "Help me. Please. I'm hurt," in tones that would have sent me running toward them if I'd encountered them on a normal night. But I'd learned to recognize the difference between human voices and whatever these things were. There was something artificial about them, like an echo that didn't quite match the original sound. I never looked out the windows. The notebook had been clear about that in several entries. When you're hiding from something supernatural, you don't give it a chance to see you seeing it. As the night wore on, the sounds began to change. The screaming became more frustrated, angrier. The footsteps moved faster around the building. Whatever was out there was getting impatient. But I stayed put. Around 4 in the morning, I heard a new sound. Voices, but different from the screaming. These were having a conversation, though I couldn't make out the words. They seemed to be discussing something, debating. The tone was casual, almost friendly. That scared me more than the screaming had. The conversation continued for about 20 minutes, then stopped abruptly. The footsteps moved away from the cabin, growing fainter as they headed back toward the tree line. I waited another hour before I even considered moving. When dawn finally broke, everything fell silent. I stayed in the cabin until full daylight, then cautiously opened the door and looked outside. The clearing was empty, showing no signs that anything had been there during the night. No footprints in the dirt around the building, no scratches on the door or shutters. But I knew what I'd heard. A month into my job, I'd learned to navigate the supernatural landscape of night shifts. I followed the rules religiously, trusted my instincts, and survived encounters that would have terrified me into quitting weeks earlier. I was beginning to understand why the previous ranger had left so suddenly. What I couldn't figure out was why anyone stayed. The fog rolled in thick that October night, turning my flashlight beam into a weak cone that barely cut through 10 feet of gray soup. I'd been working these trails for a month now, but I'd never seen it this dense. The moisture hung in the air like wet gauze, muffling every sound and making the forest feel smaller somehow. I checked my watch. 10:43. Still early for the really strange stuff, but something felt different tonight. The air had weight to it, pressing down on everything. Even my radio crackled with more static than usual. I was walking the Gatlinburg Trail when I saw the yellow raincoat. The figure moved between the trees about 60 yards to my right, that same deliberate pace I remembered from my first night. But tonight the fog made everything worse. The yellow coat appeared and disappeared in the gray mist like a ghost. There 1 second and gone the next. I stopped walking and watched. The rules said not to follow, but they didn't say anything about observing from a distance. The figure moved in a straight line through the trees, never deviating around trunks or undergrowth. When a thick oak blocked my view, I expected to see the yellow coat emerge on the other side. Instead, it just vanished completely. I waited 5 minutes, sweeping my flashlight back and forth through the fog. Nothing. The forest had swallowed the figure like it never existed. My radio crackled. Unit 7, status report. Unit 7 here, all clear on Gatlinburg Trail. Visibility's pretty bad with this fog. Copy that, stay safe out there. I clipped the radio back to my belt and kept walking. 1 down, I thought. 3 to go if tonight was going to be one of those nights. An hour later, I was on the Oconaluftee River Trail when I heard the footsteps. They came from ahead of me on the trail, measured and precise despite the fog. I stopped and listened. The steps kept coming, steady as a metronome. No variation in pace, no stumbling on the uneven ground that I couldn't see properly in this soup. I aimed my flashlight forward and caught a glimpse of the man through the gray mist. He walked toward me with that same mechanical gait I'd seen before. Arms at his sides, eyes fixed straight ahead, moving like he was following rails instead of a dirt trail. The fog swirled around him but didn't seem to slow him down at all. I stepped off the trail and positioned myself behind a large maple tree. The bark felt rough and solid against my back, the only real thing in a world turned gray and uncertain. The footsteps got closer. I held my breath and listened to them approach. Left, right, left, right. Perfect timing, like a clock ticking. He passed within 3 feet of my hiding spot. I could see him clearly despite the fog, like he carried his own pocket of clear air. Mid-40s, average height, wearing dark clothes. His face had that same blank expression, eyes focused on something I couldn't see. The footsteps continued past me down the trail. I counted to 30, then stepped back onto the path and aimed my flashlight where he should have been. Nothing. The trail stretched empty in both directions, disappearing into fog after 20 feet. But there was nowhere for him to go. No side trails, no trees close enough to hide behind. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the silence. The fog pressed in around me, and I realized my hands were shaking slightly. 2 down. I checked my watch as I walked back toward the main trail junction. 11:58, almost midnight. If Rita was going to show up, it would be soon. She was sitting on a boulder beside Cataract Falls when I found her. The fog had thinned near the water, and I could see her clearly in my flashlight beam. Same white dress, same blonde hair, same thin shoulders hunched against the cold. But something was different tonight. She looked more solid somehow, more real. "I'm lost," she said before I could speak. Her voice carried clearly through the damp air. "I can't find my parents. I stopped 15 feet away, just like before. I can't help you, Rita." She looked up at me with those pale blue eyes. "You know my name. I know what you are." Rita stood up from the boulder and smoothed down her white dress. "I'm cold. I need your jacket." "No." "The other rangers helped me." She took a step closer. "They were nice to me. I'm not other rangers." Rita tilted her head to one side, studying me. The fog swirled around her feet, but she didn't seem affected by the dampness. Her dress stayed white and clean despite the wet air. "You're different," she said. "The others wanted to help. They felt sorry for me. I know the rules." "Rules." Rita smiled, and her teeth looked sharper than before. "Do you think rules will protect you?" "They have so far." She laughed, and the sound echoed strangely in the fog. "You think you understand what's happening here?" "I understand enough." Rita took another step forward. "I really am cold. I really do need help. That part isn't a lie." I didn't move. "Doesn't matter. It should matter." Her voice got quieter, more childlike. "I'm just a little girl. I'm scared and lost and cold. Don't you want to help me?" "No." The word came out harder than I intended. Rita's expression shifted, the innocent mask slipping away. Her smile got wider, showing too many teeth. "You're learning," she said, "but you still don't understand what you're dealing with." The fog began to thicken around her, swirling faster. Rita's form started to blur at the edges, becoming translucent. "I'll see you again," she said as she faded. "Maybe next time you'll be nicer." She disappeared completely, leaving only empty space beside the boulder. The fog settled back to its normal, slow drift, and I was alone again. 3 down. I checked my watch, 1:47. Still had hours left on my shift. Part of me hoped that was it for the night, that I'd seen everything I was going to see. But the fog felt heavier now, more oppressive. The air had a charge to it, like the moment before a thunderstorm. I kept walking my routes, checking the main trails and access points. The fog made everything more difficult. Familiar landmarks disappeared into gray nothing, and I had to rely on the trail markers to keep my bearings. At 3:30, I heard my name. "Grayson." The voice came from deep in the forest, maybe 100 yards off the trail. It sounded like my sister, which was impossible since she lived in Colorado and I hadn't talked to her in months. "Grayson, help me." I stopped walking and consulted my mental copy of the rules. Never respond to voices calling your name after midnight. I'd read that one dozens of times, memorized it word for word. "Grayson, please, I'm hurt." The voice was definitely my sister's. Same tone, same slight accent from growing up in Ohio. But I knew it wasn't really her. Couldn't be her. I kept walking and tried to ignore the calls. They followed me for 10 minutes, always from just out of sight in the fog. Sometimes they sounded closer, sometimes farther away. But I didn't respond, and eventually they stopped. 4:36 in the morning. Almost dawn, though I couldn't tell with the fog blocking everything. I was thinking I might actually make it through the shift without the screaming when I heard the first one. It came from maybe 200 yards away, deep in the forest. A woman's voice, high and terrified. The scream went on for several seconds, then cut off abruptly. I stopped and listened. Rule 4 said to ignore screams from deep in the forest over 100 yards away. This qualified. The scream came again, closer this time, maybe 150 yards. Still deep forest, still covered by the rule. The third scream was definitely closer. 100 yards, maybe less. And it was moving. I started walking faster toward where I'd parked my truck. The screaming continued, getting closer with each one. 90 yards, 80, 70. By the time I reached the parking area, the screams were coming from just beyond the tree line. Multiple voices now, all screaming for help in that same artificial tone I'd heard at the equipment cabin. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking as I tried to unlock the truck door. The screaming got louder, more urgent. I could hear movement in the fog, branches breaking, footsteps running through the underbrush. The door finally opened and I jumped inside, slamming it behind me. The engine turned over on the second try and I threw the truck into drive. As I pulled out of the parking area, the screaming followed me. Voices called from both sides of the road, keeping pace with the truck. Through the fog, I could see shapes moving between the trees, but I couldn't make out details. I pressed harder on the gas pedal. The speedometer hit 40, then 45. The screaming started to fade behind me, but I didn't slow down until I reached the main road. The ranger station parking lot was empty except for Nolan's truck. I pulled in next to it and sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel. The fog was thinner here, and I could see the station windows glowing with warm yellow light. I grabbed my gear and walked to the front door. It opened before I could knock. Nolan stood there with 2 cups of coffee like he'd been waiting for me. His face had that same knowing expression I'd seen before, tired but understanding. "Bad night?" he asked. I took one of the coffee cups and followed him inside. The station felt warm and solid after hours in the fog. Real walls, real floors, real fluorescent lights humming overhead. "All 4, I said. Nolan nodded and settled into his desk chair. "Yellow coat?" "Yeah, near Gatlinburg Trail. Watched it disappear into the fog." "The man?" Okanalufty River Trail, same as before, stepped aside and let him pass. Rita? Cataract Falls. She was more insistent tonight, wanted my jacket, said the other rangers helped her. But I refused and she faded away with that same look. Nolan sipped his coffee, and the screaming started distant, maybe 200 yards out. But they got closer fast. I ran for the truck and drove straight here. They followed me almost to the main road. October, Nolan said, like that explained everything. What about October? Always the worst month. They're more active when the veil gets thin. He leaned back in his chair and studied me. 4 encounters in one shift. That's unusual, even for October. Is it going to get worse? Nolan was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. 20 years I've been doing this job. 20 years of night shifts and strange encounters and things that shouldn't exist. You know what I've learned? I waited. I still ain't used to it. Still get that chill when I hear my name called in the dark. Still feel like running when Rita shows up with those pale eyes. He looked up at me. But I learned to live with it. How? The rules work, Grayson. They've kept me alive for 20 years, and they'll keep you alive too if you follow them. He finished his coffee and set the cup down. You did good tonight. All 4 encounters, and you're sitting here drinking coffee instead of missing like Foster. I thought about that. Do you think it'll ever stop? The encounters? Nolan shook his head. They were here before the park, and they'll be here after we're gone. The best we can do is learn to coexist. The fog was starting to lift outside the station windows. I could see the first hints of dawn creeping through the gray, turning it lighter. Get some rest, Nolan said. Tomorrow night's another shift. I picked up the notebook from where I'd set it on Nolan's desk. The leather cover was getting soft from handling, and the edges of the pages had started to curl. 3 weeks of carrying it in my pocket every shift, pulling it out to double-check rules I already knew by heart. The thing looked like it had been through a war. How long did it take you to get used to all this? I asked. Nolan looked up from his coffee. Used to it? The encounters. The things out there. I gestured toward the window where the first light was starting to show through the trees. Does it ever feel normal? He was quiet for a minute, turning his mug in slow circles on the desk. Define normal. You know what I mean. I really don't. Nolan leaned back in his chair. You asking if I stopped being scared? If I stopped jumping when I hear my name called after midnight? If Rita stopped making my skin crawl? I nodded. Then no. Never got used to it. He took a sip of coffee. But I learned to work with it. There's a difference. I flipped through a few pages of the notebook. Martinez's entry about the blood-soaked jacket. Thompson's account of losing 8 hours. Rodriguez writing about maggots in his granola bar. These rules really work? You're sitting here asking me that question instead of missing like Foster. What do you think? Fair point. I'd followed the rules through 4 encounters in one night just a few hours ago. Rita had gotten more aggressive, more insistent. The screaming had followed me all the way to my truck. But I was here, drinking coffee, talking to Nolan instead of vanishing into the mountains. The rules work because they're boundaries, Nolan said. Not because they're magic, not because they trick anything. They work because the things out there operate within certain limits, and the rules respect those limits. What kind of limits? Can't say for sure, but Rita always appears as a lost child. Always asks for help the same way. The yellow coat always walks the same pattern through the trees. The voices calling your name always come from deep forest, never from the trail. Nolan shrugged. They've got rules too, seems like. Our rules work within their rules. I thought about that. Rita's reaction when I'd refused to help her. The way she'd shifted from pleading child to something else entirely. But she hadn't attacked me. Hadn't followed me. Just faded away with a warning. How many rangers have you trained? 7, counting you. How many stayed? Nolan's expression went flat. 3. What happened to the others? 2 transferred after their first month. 1 lasted 6 months, then put in for a station in Florida. Another one made it almost a year before requesting reassignment to day shifts only. Nolan paused. Foster lasted 2 years before he disappeared. I set the notebook down. And the 3 who stayed? Martinez transferred to Colorado last year, wanted to try mountain rescue work. Chan's at Yellowstone now. Both good rangers, both followed the rules. So just you and me. For now. I looked at the notebook again. All those entries from rangers spanning 15 years. Rules written in different handwriting, different ink. Updates and additions as people learned new things about what lived in these mountains. Why do you stay? Nolan was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I started to think he wasn't going to answer. Someone has to, he finally said. Visitors come through here every day. Families with kids. Hikers who don't know what they might run into after dark. College students who think camping off the designated areas is an adventure. He finished his coffee. Most of them never see anything, but some do. And when they do, they need rangers who understand what they're dealing with. Have you ever had to help someone during an encounter? Twice. Nolan's voice went quiet. Young couple camping near Cataract Falls about 10 years ago. They came running into the station at 3 a.m, said a little girl in a white dress had been circling their tent all night, asking for help. I drove them out to their campsite, helped them pack up their gear. Did you see Rita? No, but their tent was surrounded by small footprints in the dirt, barefoot prints, child-sized, going in circles around the tent for hours based on how deep they were worn. Nolan shook his head. The couple left that night, never came back. What was the second time? Hiker got lost 3 years ago, followed a voice calling his name deeper into the forest. Found him the next morning about 2 miles off any trail, sitting against a tree, wouldn't talk for 6 hours. When he finally spoke, he said his dead father had been calling to him all night, leading him through the woods. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. His dead father. Father died in a car accident when the guy was 12. 20 years dead when this happened. Nolan stood up, carried his empty mug to the small sink. The voices don't always use names of living people. That was a new piece of information. I thought about the rules in the notebook. Rule 2 said never respond to voices calling your name after midnight, but it didn't specify anything about who the voices claimed to be. Is that in the notebook? Page 15, Rodriguez's entry from 2018. He heard his grandfather calling for help. Grandfather had been dead for 5 years. I flipped to page 15, found Rodriguez's neat handwriting. Voice sounded exactly like Abuelo. Same accent, same way he said my name when I was little. But Abuelo died in 2013. Rule 2 kept me on the trail. Voice called for 2 hours before stopping. Jesus. They learn things about us, Nolan said. Don't know how, but they use what they learn. I closed the notebook, slipped it into my shirt pocket. The weight of it had become familiar, comforting even. 3 weeks ago, I would have laughed at anyone who handed me a book of rules for dealing with supernatural encounters. Now it felt like the most important thing I owned. You think I'll make it? Nolan looked at me for a moment. You've had 5 encounters, followed the rules every time, even when your instincts told you to help Rita, even when the screaming got close enough to make you run. He pulled on his jacket. Most rangers who don't make it break the rules within their first 2 weeks. You're past that point. What about Foster? Foster lasted 2 years. Followed the rules perfectly for 23 months. Then one night he decided he was going to help Rita find her parents. Nolan zipped up his jacket. We found his truck the next morning. Radio, flashlight, and notebook sitting on the driver's seat. No sign of Foster. I thought about Rita's words from a few hours ago. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Maybe Foster had thought he understood. Maybe he'd gotten confident after 2 years of successful encounters. The rules aren't suggestions, Nolan said. They're not guidelines you can bend when you feel like being a hero. They're absolute. The moment you start thinking you know better, you're in trouble. I nodded. Understood. Good. Nolan headed toward the door. Get some sleep. I'll see you tonight. He left, and I sat alone in the station for a few minutes. The sun was fully up now, streaming through the windows and making the whole place look normal. Just a ranger station with desks and radios and coffee cups. Nothing supernatural about it in daylight. But I knew what was waiting in those mountains when darkness fell. I'd seen Rita's sharp teeth when she smiled. I'd heard the artificial quality in the screaming voices. I'd watched the yellow raincoat figure move through trees like physics didn't apply to it. I pulled out the notebook one more time, opened it to the first page. Night shift protocols, essential rules for ranger safety. Below that, Nolan's 4 rules in neat block letters. Never follow anyone in a yellow raincoat off designated trails. Never respond to voices calling your name after midnight. Only observe Rita Ortega. Never touch her, give her anything, or lead her anywhere. Ignore screams from deep forest, but investigate screams near trails immediately. 4 simple rules. The difference between going home in the morning and disappearing forever. I'd memorized them word for word, but I still read them again. Always would, probably. Some things were too important to trust to memory alone. My shift started again. In 14 hours, Rita would be out there, looking for a ranger willing to help a lost little girl. The yellow raincoat figure would walk its pattern through the trees. Voices would call names from the deep forest. Screams would echo through the darkness. But I had the rules now. I understood what this job really required, not just wilderness training and emergency protocols. It required accepting that some things couldn't be explained, only survived. It required faith in rules written by men who'd faced the same threats and lived to write them down. I finished my coffee and stood up. Time to head home, get some sleep before tonight's patrol. The notebook went back into my pocket where it belonged, where it would stay for as long as I worked these mountains. I'd learned the most important lesson of night shift work in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The supernatural threats were real, but they could be survived. Other rangers had proven that. Nolan had proven that for 20 years. The rules worked. Follow them, and you went home in the morning. Break them, and you disappeared like Foster. I walked outside into the morning sunlight, got into my truck, and started the engine. 14 hours until my next shift. 14 hours to rest and prepare for another night of encounters that most people would never believe. But I believed now. I'd seen too much to doubt it, and I had the tools to survive it. The truck's engine settled into a steady idle as I pulled out of the station parking lot. In my pocket, the notebook rested against my chest, a reminder of everything I'd learned. Tonight, I'd patrol these trails again. Rita might appear on a log or boulder, asking for help with tears in her pale blue eyes. The yellow raincoat might move through the trees with impossible precision. Voices might call my name from the darkness. I'd follow the rules just like I had for 3 weeks, just like I would for as long as I worked these mountains. The entities would remain ancient and persistent, but I had knowledge now. I had boundaries that worked. I drove toward home, no longer the skeptical rookie who'd started training a month ago. I was a ranger who understood the true nature of night shifts in this park. The darkness held threats that couldn't be explained, only respected, and I knew how to survive them. How